and it seems to be a pretty standard kind of town.
Less than 2 miles from iconic Ohio Stadium is Riverview Drive in the Masjid Omar Mosque, home of the largest known al-Qaeda terror cell since 9/11. In August 2007, 3 men who attended the mosque, Christopher Paul, Ayman Ferris, and Nuruddin Abdi, met at this coffee shop in Upper Arlington, Ohio. They planned to unleash domestic terror, first by bombing a suburban mall.
It's not clear which, if any, of the 6 major shopping malls around Columbus the alleged terrorist wanted to blow up, and far from certain whether he had the actual wherewithal to do it. But federal investigators say Somali native and alleged al-Qaeda operative Nuruddin Abdi has bragged to them that that was his goal.
Abdi was arrested on November 28, 2003, and charged with conspiracy to provide material support to al-Qaeda and 2 counts of fraud.
He is a truck driver from Ohio, born in Kashmir, and a U.S. citizen since 1999. But federal authorities say Ayman Ferris is something more, an al-Qaeda operative.
Ferris was convicted of providing material support to al-Qaeda for his role in a plot to destroy the Brooklyn Bridge.
10 TV has learned Christopher Paul, a Worthington man accused of plotting to help al-Qaeda, will plead guilty to working with terrorists.
Christopher Paul grew up in the northwest suburbs of Columbus. He was a star athlete at Worthington High School, where he graduated in 1983. He attended Ohio State, where it's believed he converted to Islam. At some point during his life, Paul committed to violent jihad. He received his training at an al-Qaeda training facility in Afghanistan. In June 2008, Paul pleaded to conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction in a plot to attack a French island resort. Abdulhakim Mujahid Muhammad also attended the Masjid Omar Mosque. In June 2009, he opened fire on soldiers in front of a United States military recruiting office in Little Rock, Arkansas, in a jihad attack. In a January 2010 letter to Judge Herbert Wright Jr., he wrote, "I'm affiliated with al-Qaeda. This was a jihadi attack on infidel forces that didn't go as planned." The Department of Justice refused to try the case in federal court as a domestic terror attack. Muhammad was tried for murder by the state of Arkansas, and there was no investigation into his radicalization or training. 4 individuals with ties to the mosque on Riverview Drive linked to terrorism. Patrick Poole began investigating.
And so I'm driving down the road here, and of course this is an area I'm pretty familiar with since I went to high school right there. And I drive by here, Sunrise Academy, the full-time Islamic school. And I'm like, that's unusual. You know, that used to be the public library building. And that's when I went home and looked them up on the internet and saw that Salah Sultan was their religious director.
Patrick Poole lives in central Ohio. He discovered that the road to domestic terror went through his neighborhood.
And of course, when I started looking into Salah Sultan, one of the things I did was his address was on his resume. And so I looked it up, and lo and behold, right here is where he lived. Not more than a mile from my house.
Dr. Salah Sultan was the religious director at the Masjid Omar Mosque. He later moved to the Noor Islamic Cultural Center in Hilliard, Ohio. Poole wrote an article about Sultan, referencing previously published materials demonstrating his connections to terrorist organizations. The interfaith community rallied around Sultan, as did the local newspaper.
So the Dispatch had their religion reporter come out and interview me, and the article rolls out about a month after my report, and you know, here I'm a racist bigot, Islamophobe, trying to impose Christian theocracy, all for daring to question this guy, what had already been reported about this gentleman here in Hilliard.
The Muslim Brotherhood has invented a term, and they've been very effective with this, called Islamophobia. And essentially, anybody who tries to address Islamist ideology, no matter how hostile it is objectively to the West, is deemed to be speaking hatefully about Islam, and therefore to be a bigot and an Islamophobe. And in American culture, that's the worst thing you can be, right? Is a bigot. It doesn't matter whether you really are one or not. What matters is whether you'll be accused of being one. And that really is the template that the media follows.
While Sultan was being labeled as a respected religious leader, there was plenty of evidence to suggest he was anything but a moderate. Posted on Sultan's personal website was his resume.
His vision, which I guess is his hope for the future, is to live happily and die as a martyr. For those of us, I don't think you have to be somebody who's actually either prosecuted or investigated terrorism cases to know that martyrdom is the way that in Islamist thought they refer to people who die in the jihad, that is, who die in violent activity, whether it's against the United States or Israel or another target that's achieved as an enemy or viewed as an enemy. So I think that's a. This looks like a resume that's certainly suggestive of somebody who is steeped in Islamist ideology, and as somebody who's studied Islamist ideology and knows that it's hostile to the West, I'd find this alarming.
2 weeks after the Columbus Dispatch writes their defense of Dr. Salah Sultan, he shows up on Middle Eastern TV where he's claiming that the United States government was behind 9/11.
لكن الموضوع كله موضوع كبير تم التخطيط له من داخل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية حتى يمكن السيطرة على العالم وإرهاب العالم كله.
And then he goes on to defend an Al-Qaeda cleric, a close friend of bin Laden, Abdul Majid al-Zindani, and there was never any follow-up report with the Columbus Dispatch.
The United States Treasury Department has labeled Sheikh Zindani as a specially designated global terrorist. Sultan had his application for U.S. citizenship suspended and fled the U.S. in 2007.
So fast forward to 2012, where is he today? Well, he's leading Muslim Brotherhood rallies in Cairo. He's meeting with the top Hamas leaders, and, he's a senior advisor to the new Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt.
With Sultan as a top advisor, President Mohamed Morsi has fast-tracked an Islamist agenda, monopolizing power on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood.
سيظل القرآن دستورنا. القرآن دستورنا.
Another former leader at the Masjid Omar Mosque on Riverview Drive is now the head of the Noor Islamic Cultural Center, Dr. Hani Safer. He has been listed as the founder, spiritual leader, administrator, and chairman of the Noor Center. He's a former professor at Ohio State University and currently teaches at Columbus State Community College. He was even the featured speaker at a 9/11 memorial service in 2011.
When those people attacked the Twin Tower, they did not only destroy it, they destroyed the image of Islam.
This is the first responders park that they opened the last September 11th anniversary that featured Hani Safer as one of the speakers. So, of course, the irony being that, you had this imam who was head of the mosque that had the Al-Qaeda cell, and he's leading the, interfaith service at the park, honoring the first responders. I mean, it's just rich with irony.
The Noor Center, under Dr. Safer's leadership, has hosted soldiers prior to their deployment to the Middle East.
Today, the Muslim headscarf is part of her military uniform.
The headscarf is just respect for the center here, for the women that are here, and, you know, just to be respectful to the people and come into their place being respectful.
Campbell and about 40 other members of the U.S. Army Reserves sat down with members of the Noor Islamic Cultural Center to learn more about Islam and cultures in Muslim countries.
In central Ohio, Hani Soccer is known as an interfaith moderate. However, during the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism finance trial in U.S. history, the Justice Department entered into evidence documents showing Soccer was one of the top leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood movement in North America. Specifically, he was a member of the board of directors and on the executive committee.
We don't want to inquire into their ideology because everybody is afraid of drawing the obvious conclusion that there's a nexus between Islamic scripture and Islamic doctrine and acts of terrorism. And nobody wants to be seen as somebody who is condemning an entire religion, which is what the Muslim Brotherhood frames it as if you draw that common sense connection, which, by the way, is something that the Islamists themselves draw when they're justifying acts of terrorism.
7 generations of my family have lived here in Hilliard. A lot of changes, but I doubt anybody would have ever have expected that, you know, this little cow town would end up being a, you know, hub of Islamic extremism, a hub of anything for that matter.
The thing to remember is this is not something that's isolated to Columbus, Ohio. This is happening everywhere, whether it's Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or Temecula, California, or Chicago, Illinois, or Boston, Massachusetts. This is occurring everywhere we look.
And, as has happened in Columbus, many who question the Muslim Brotherhood narrative are quickly branded as Islamophobic and racist.
And it was only after the neighbors created opposition and brought in, you know, some of their, you know, anti-Muslim hatred into this picture that the city took a step back.
Salam Al-Mariyati is the president of the Los Angeles-based Muslim Public Affairs Council.
We are seeing more evidence of anti-Muslim bigotry and Islam bashing.
To me, it seems like she is the extremist at this point. She's the one going around the United States lobbying against Islamic centers throughout all of the United States. It's not just the ones in Murfreesboro.
Now is the moment when we can do something. And with your help, we will do something.
Attention, patriots who oppose Barack Obama. Obama would be president of the United States for 4 more years if the election were held tomorrow. Here's why. Obama gained 5% in the polls since the Democratic National Convention, and it gets worse. With the cash being funneled in from big labor and Hollywood, Barack Obama and Joe Biden have outraced us in August. With less than 50 days until the election, we must ask you and 20 million patriots to call right now and sign the largest voice pledge in history. We can still turn back the tide of socialism that's been taking over our country for the past 4 years. Call 1-800-414-5504 right now to affix your name to the official pledge to elect Mitt Romney.
One of the things that we forget, or we don't do enough of, is to understand September the 11th in the context of 20th century history. It's not about the last 10 years, it's not about the last 20 years, it's about the last century. It's about the fact that less than 100 years ago, the caliphate still existed. We think words like the caliphate are funny, or quaint. What, a religious empire of Islam? You're joking, right? I mean, that was prehistory. No. That existed in 1914. Now, we didn't call it the caliphate. It was called the Ottoman Empire. But for Muslims, it was the caliphate. It was the religious empire of Islam that had existed for centuries.
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which used to be the Organization of the Islamic Conference, is the caliphate in the making. It's basically 56 Islamic sovereign governments and the Palestinian Authority.
Their goal of the implementation of Sharia, the goal of Al-Qaeda, the implementation of Sharia, the establishment of the caliphate, and the Muslim Brotherhood and Tablighi Jamaat and Jamaat-e-Islami and the other parallel movements like the Brotherhood, nobody's ever put those together. That Turkey and Egypt and Pakistan are all parties to an organization whose stated doctrine is the same as Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood and these other groups. That's important, and that's something Americans need to know.
Now, they're basically positioning themselves as the proto-caliphate. And they've said that. They go all the way back to 1988. They play with the language so they can say, we didn't say that. But they kind of run right up to it and walk away. They make all these gestures to make it clear that we are that. But they do call themselves the Ummah. When the OIC meets, it's the Ummah, the Muslim community. And if you think about it, if they really do represent the Muslim world at the head of state level, that is the Ummah. And if they actually do make laws at the head of state level for the entire Muslim world, that would be the replacement of the caliphate. The State Department's relationship, and of course Secretary Clinton as the head of the State Department, the Secretary of State, is that she has ongoing relations. We have a person who sits in at the OIC.
Hello, my name is Rashad Hussain, and I'm the President's Special Envoy to the Organization of the Islamic Conference.
I would think it would be much better if at senior level of the U.S. government we're meeting with the OIC, we're also meeting with some large group of non-Islamist, non-superiority, non-dominating Muslims, such as those in Indonesia. I think as a general proposition, the U.S. government ought to have relations with countries, not with religions.
In 2005, the OIC held a summit in Saudi Arabia. The group developed a 10-year strategic action plan, which included a directive to combat defamation of Islam.
The term Islamophobia is the politically correct term they created under which it rests the defamation of Islam concept, which they plan to run through the United Nations.
It makes no apologies about that. It's quite straightforward. And the most frightening thing about it for Americans in the short term is that the biggest project the OIC has in the West, and particularly in the United States, is to restrict First Amendment rights. They basically want to make it a crime to discuss Islam in anything that they would perceive as a negative fashion.
In 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton attended a summit in Turkey where she met with the head of the OIC, who was garnering support for United Nations Resolution 1618, the OIC's defamation of religion statute.
Now, that defamation of religion statute is a direct assault on the First Amendment. It's a direct assault on the First Amendment. And what did Secretary Clinton say? She committed in a foreign country to a foreign power, to a foreign entity, the head of the OIC, that she would use old-fashioned techniques of peer pressure and shaming to go after anybody who would try to stand up against that.
And I want to applaud the organization of the Islamic Conference for its leadership in securing the recent resolution by the United Nations Human Rights Council that takes a strong stand against discrimination and violence based upon religion or belief.
I mean, these are the words of the apologists. And that's not what public officials should be telling the American people. The American people need to know what's going on.
And what the State Department is basically agreeing to is to have restrictions on speech that would incite what they would call hostility to Islam. Now, the only incitement you're allowed to prosecute under American law is incitement to violence.
U.S. Ambassador Eileen Chamberlain Donahoe spoke to the UN Human Rights Council in March of 2011, supporting the resolution.
We have long shared the concerns of the co-sponsors and others about intolerance, discrimination, and violence directed against persons on the basis of their religion or belief.
The Brotherhood says to Al-Qaeda and the Salafi movement, look, we can do this through legal means, guys.
elections. They're doing it in the Middle East and North Africa, right? They're winning elections throughout the region. The Brotherhood's doing it through completely legal means in most cases. They're winning elections. They're getting jobs in the media, in academia. They're infiltrating.
Tatler reusable canning lid.